Mr. Gargiulo. That's killer. WBCB presents That's Cool. Are you talking to me? Pro Wrestling Radio. Oh, it's so. Can you feel it? Oh, the damn bull. Call in with a question or comment. 6-1. Just bring it. What is he doing here? At 1-888-922-2149. Oh, it's true. Don't make me hurt you. Be awesome. Be the man. You got it. That's hard time. I hate your ever. And now your host of the show. That's how I roll. Eric. Excuse me. And that's the bottom line.
Good afternoon and welcome to a very special edition of Pro Wrestling Radio. My name is Eric Gargiulo and I will be here until 1 o'clock talking about the sport of professional wrestling. Now, I will be joined by former WWWF World Heavyweight Champion, Hall of Fame inductee, and just one of the all-time greats, Superstar Billy Graham, in about 10 minutes. I just talked to him. He's running a little bit behind. So I will be joined by Billy Graham at about 12:15. I will take your calls with Billy Graham. Once he comes on the show, we'll ask him a couple of questions, and then I'll start taking calls at about 25 after. And you will have your chance to talk to one of the all-time greats, Superstar Billy Graham. And what he did tell me was that he wants to be asked the tough questions. If you have a question about Vince McMahon, about drug abuse, about steroid abuse, Billy Graham, one of those controversial figures in this sport, he's a self-admitted ex-drug addict. He used steroids, one of the pioneers of bringing steroids into the professional wrestling business, and he has no problem saying so. And he also has no problems telling you the effects to his body today and how it has affected him and his family and his career, which is very negatively. But Billy Graham does not mind being asked the tough questions. And Billy was very outspoken following the tragic deaths of Nancy Benoit, Chris Benoit's son, and, of course, Chris Benoit himself. So Billy Graham was very outspoken about drug abuse in professional wrestling, and Billy will be here today talking about that, talking about his career, and really anything else that you want to ask him. So that will be coming up in less than 10 minutes. Superstar Billy Graham, one of my all-time favorites. I mean, I sometimes just sit and search through YouTube on my downtime and just look for old Superstar Billy Graham promos because, just what an innovator of the interview Superstar Billy Graham was. I mean, just really what a pioneer of the wrestling business today. What we see today, all the showmanship, the entertainment, the glamour, a lot of people will point back to Gorgeous George as the man that pioneered that. And yes, he definitely changed the way professional wrestling was presented. But Superstar Billy Graham just took it to a whole other level. And I'm really excited to be talking to Superstar Billy Graham. I love having the all-time greats on the show because it was just such a different era, and I just have so much respect for those gentlemen and women from that era. And Billy Graham, he's got such a great story. I mean, I've read his book, I've watched his DVD, I've watched countless interviews, I've read countless interviews with him, and he's a guy that doesn't pull any punches. So, it'll be interesting to hear what the Superstar has to say. And, of course, due to the shortened time, I expected him for the hour. We're getting him for about 40 minutes. Billy Graham will reschedule and have him back for another hour sometime in the new year. So I'm going to come up at 12:15, Superstar Billy Graham. A couple of quick things that I'll hit on before we go to Superstar Billy Graham. Ric Flair, his legacy is in jeopardy, and I wrote a lengthy piece on PhillyBurbs.com this week taking a look at Ric Flair and his legacy. I was one of many who beat the drum. Be fair to Flair. Give him one last chance. He deserves that last opportunity. I was one of many who said that here, who wrote about it. I'm a big Ric Flair fan. I mean, one of my all-time favorites. Watching Ric Flair really takes me back to my teenage years, my childhood, and I think that we all love and respect what Ric Flair has given us as fans, especially the fans that grew up watching Ric Flair in his prime and even the years thereafter. But the Ric Flair that I watched on Monday Night Raw 2 weeks ago, wrestling Randy Orton, win or not. Wow, just what a far cry from the Ric Flair we grew up with. And, yeah, you give him some leeway because he is Ric Flair. He's coming up on his 59th birthday, and we understand that. But, I mean, my goodness, Ric Flair looked every bit of his age and then some. There are guys that have wrestled in their 70s, and while they may look to be elderly, they don't exactly look their age. But, man, Ric Flair looked like what my grandfather, God bless his soul, if he was still alive, would look like if he was in there wrestling at 59. I mean, he just did not look good. It did not look good for the entire WWE. For fans that aren't aware of the legacy of Ric Flair, and they're just tuning in and watching this guy, they're thinking, why is this grandfather being able to hang in there with Randy Orton? I mean, if you ever watch back, especially on WWE 24/7, you see those old school television shows, and you see those old enhancement matches, the jobbers, the preliminary wrestlers, those guys all looked like Ric Flair back then. And there was a reason for that. You had your guys that looked like wrestlers against the guys that actually looked like enhancement talent. And Ric Flair is far from an enhancement talent, but that was the view and the opinion. If you're watching for the first time, or you're just not familiar with Flair, or you don't understand his accomplishment, his accomplishments in the sport of professional wrestling, and it's a darn shame that he has to go out like that. But now they are reconsidering. They're talking about pulling the plug on the entire program, and where will this leave Flair from here? Here's a guy that's been divorced many times over. He's had his struggles with the government. His financial woes have been well documented. Here's a guy that, sadly enough, needs to be wrestling right now, but shouldn't be wrestling right now. So what do you do with him? Do you just let him walk away and go into TNA? I mean, TNA will take him, and TNA will put him on top and, do whatever it is that Flair wants to do. TNA will make him champion, and it would be a big boost of credibility to TNA. I think he would do more for TNA than he could do right now for the WWE. I think you can say that about a lot of people. But what do you do with Ric Flair? It's a real interesting question. And this Monday, the 15-year anniversary of Raw, real interesting situation is going to be presented because they are advertising the return, the one-night reunion of Evolution. Batista, Triple H, Ric Flair, and Randy Orton. Obviously, there is some kind of an angle coming out of this, but how do you put these four together without acknowledging what's been going on in recent weeks with Flair and Triple H and Randy Orton and Batista? Well, Batista out of the equation. And it just goes to show you, too, you can have your criticism of Triple H. You can have your criticism of Ric Flair, but there is something to be said that they took two young guys that were floundering around in Randy Orton and Batista back at that time, put them into Evolution, took them on the road, showed them the ropes, tugged with them every night, and now these two guys are the flagship stars of the top two shows in professional wrestling in Raw and SmackDown. So some credit has to be given out, especially where it is due. So it'll be interesting to see what happens this coming Monday on the 15-year anniversary of Raw. And it should be a really fun show. They're advertising a lot of people coming back. It was leaked out this week that Tammy Sitch, a girl I've worked with many times in wrestling, she's finally going to be back on Raw. And I know that is something that Tammy wanted to do for a long time, but she wanted to make sure she was back in sunny shape before she got there, and it took her a long time to do it. It was a long, hard road, but she looks absolutely phenomenal, and she's going to be back on Raw. It would not surprise me if this somehow turned into a job somewhere down the line for Tammy Sitch, and which is what an incredible story her story is. But yes, Tammy Sitch will be back. Trish Stratus will be back on Raw for the first time in a long time. Lita being rumored to be back on Raw. Of course, the usual suspects returning. Steve Austin, Mick Foley, Eric Bischoff, all back on Raw. Hulk Hogan, a name you didn't think would be back on Raw anytime soon. He's coming back, and don't tell me his divorce didn't have anything to do with this. Hogan is back and willing to do business, and losing 50% of your assets will do that to you. But Hogan will be back this Monday on Raw. There are rumors that The Rock may show up with some kind of a tape segment, but it should be a really fun show. We'll talk a lot about that next week on Raw. So what I am going to do is I'm going to take a quick timeout. I'm going to line up the superstar himself, Billy Graham. I'll give him a call back. We'll get him up on the air. When we come back from the break, we will talk to the legendary superstar Billy Graham. And during the course of the next 45 minutes, I will take your calls for this incredible legend, superstar Billy Graham. And I'll ask you to hold off on calling for about 10 minutes. And about 5-10 minutes into the interview, if you want to start calling, that's fine. And we'll try and get in as many calls as possible. So coming up after the break, scheduled to join us, superstar Billy Graham. And I am so excited about this one. I think it's going to be a great one. Well, you're listening to the radio show in a couple of different places. One, live on the internet on WBCB1490.com, archived on my website at ProWrestlingRadio.com. But on the air on WBCB 1490 AM.
And now back to more Wrestle Talk with the man himself, Eric Gargiulo.
Very much, Bill Melody. And without further ado, this is a show that I've been excited about, man, for quite some time. I've had a lot of great guests on here over the last 9.5 years, but this is a man that I have always wanted, and now we have him. He is a former Triple WF World Heavyweight Champion, a Hall of Fame inductee, and one of my all-time favorites. Superstar Billy Graham, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Eric. It's good to be here, buddy. And I didn't realize, listening to your tag here, that you've been on for 9.5 years.
Yes, sir.
Wow. Well, you must be one of the original guys doing this, and that's a long time to be doing these interviews.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. The time I just had Chris Jericho on about 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
And he was the very first guest that I had back in 1999 or so, or whenever it was we started. And it was just pretty ironic having the guys on now that have gone on to become bigger stars that back in the day were just, kind of on the cusp of things.
Oh, sure. Yes, of course. And Chris Jericho is just a great guy, as you know.
Yes.
And his talent, boy, he just has so much talent that, of course, I think his real talent is in his speaking ability, of course. You know, his promo abilities. He's just awesome,
Yes.
And I tell you, Philadelphia, that's one of my top 3 favorite towns, along with Boston, New York, and then Philadelphia. As far as wrestling towns, the fans there are just you just can't you can't beat the East Coast fans for intensity anyway.
Yeah.
But those folks, they're in Philadelphia. It's just there's nothing like it, and it's been great.
Yeah. Did your opponents, when you wrestled on the East Coast in your heyday as champion and leading up to such, did your opponents, the baby faces, did they become frustrated because you would come out there and be cheered, which is something at that time unheard of in the wrestling business?
Yeah, it was eventually, the fans started making those early posters, Superstar Billy Graham and stuff like that, and a lot of the fans started making homemade T-shirts and stuff. I've got some great photos that have been collected over the years by fans. Now that we have the internet, it's great,
Yeah.
Folks can they find stuff and they can email it to you, and so I've got a treasure trove of photographs of all my babyface fans when I was heel champ, and of course I think Eric, the deal is the East Coast fans. I think they're a different breed of fans. They're far more intense, and they really enjoyed being entertained. You know. And I Philadelphia, I remember almost all my matches there at the Spectrum,
Yeah.
And especially that you want to talk about later, the great cage match with Bruno there,
Yeah, well, let's talk about it now. I've had Bruno. Bruno's one of probably my most frequent guests that I've had on over the 9 years or so, and we've talked about your matches. Since you touched on it, and I had the question written down here, especially for the local fans that are listening, what do you remember about that night that you turned away thousands playing Bruno in the cage?
Yeah, that was a great night. I remember was at the old Philadelphia Hotel right there on the airport, Philadelphia Airport Hotel, and watching the news. And the 5 o'clock news in Philadelphia was coming on, and they were saying, that they had 5,000 to 10,000 fans out front of the Spectrum, and nobody could get in, and don't go there. It's sold out. You got, all these thousands of folks on the streets, and it was a real that event, that cage match with Bruno set the all-time attendance record for the Spectrum at about almost a little over 20,000 fans inside the Spectrum. And I remember they had put extra seats in.
Wow.
And there was about maybe 2 feet between the front row seats and the ring,
Yeah.
It was just an awesome turnout and support of the fans. And, of course, I don't think we let the fans down. I think we gave them a real good match in that cage. And that stays with me as probably, and other wrestling historians like Dave Meltzer, for instance, have said that event and my drawing power in the Philadelphia Spectrum, having all the sellouts that I had there, was far more impressive than all the sellouts I had in Madison Square Garden, because, of course, of the population. 10, 15 million people in New York, you're going to draw a lot of folks.
Yeah.
But to sell out the Spectrum the way we did was really in history a very, very more important as far as historians go than in the New York Madison Square Garden. See, so it's a great thing. It's a great compliment.
That's awesome. That's awesome. We are talking to superstar Billy Graham. Something I want to ask you, and I'm going to jump around here, in the time that I have you. Something that Bruno talks about sometimes on the show is when he came back in the mid-'80s or so, when he was teaming with David and that thing, and then you came back subsequently thereafter. Bruno says a lot of it was because the houses weren't doing as well as people think with Hogan on top, so Vince wanted Bruno back. Then, Vince wanted people like yourself back, people that were proven draws. Do you think there's anything to that?
I don't. I have never analyzed that question, Eric. That's a very, very good question and analysis by Bruno. I know that take me out of the equation and just leave Bruno in, because he would be the man you would go to when you need a guarantee, folks to fill up the house,
Yeah.
Because I know once I passed the torch over to Backlund, that many, many, many matches, Bruno and I were on the same card supporting in a supportive role of Backlund and his defense of his belt at that time. And it was obvious that Bruno was really the one who drew the house.
Yeah.
And it was a ploy of Vince Sr. to really load the cards up when Backlund took over, to make sure there were people in that building, because there was a lot of disappointment when the kid took it.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of Backlund, he's a very polarizing figure. And, for somebody like myself in my, mid to early 30s, I grew up on Backlund, so I have a little bit more of a love affair with him than other fans. But he's a very polarizing man, and I've heard you say different things, and I've talked to other guys on the show over the last, so many years that have, had the chance to work with Backlund, and they've described him as difficult to work with. Would you agree or disagree on that?
Yes, to the extent that he was actually petrified, literally frozen with fear at someone, referee, wrestlers, double-crossing him and getting a fast count on the and getting that belt. He was absolutely paranoid, because he knew, sadly, he was a loner, and he just didn't. There was something about his personality, the nicest guy in the world, but there was something about his personality. I think it was the fact that most of the boys felt that he was not really deserving of getting that title, especially when guys like you, well, actually before you, because of your age, were raised on Bruno Sammartino.
Right.
See, and it just, there was a big, and this is an amazing thing, Vince Sr. actually asked Dusty Rhodes and myself more than once how we could get this kid, Bob Backlund, to get some sort of charisma. He was very lacking in real charisma, you know.
Yeah.
Like Chris Jericho has great charisma. He's just charismatic, you know.
Right.
And Dusty, I told him, you just can't manufacture real charisma. And Vince Sr. knew that because he had been around all the guys, the legends, you know. And so that was one thing that that I think hurt Bobby in his acceptance on the peer level, was because they felt that he had not really paid his dues as far as years and years and years, and really had proven himself, because Vince, he was relatively just an unknown, you know.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of disappointment about Backlund taking the belt. As a matter of fact, the cage match with me and Bruno in the Spectrum, which is a Saturday before the Monday that I gave that belt to Backlund in Madison Square Garden, Bruno was totally unaware that I was going to drop the belt to Backlund 2 nights later in Madison Square Garden, and he actually freaked out about it.
Wow.
He said, how can Vince make this mistake? It's just... And it's very amazing because Bruno, and next time you have him on, ask him about this.
Definitely.
I'm sure you remember, told me to suggest it, and I did fake an injury, a knee injury, in our cage match, so that I would go into the match in Madison Square Garden with my knee wrapped and limping as I went into the ring to devalue the title change because I had an injury.
That's a great story. I've read that in your book. I've heard you tell it many times. I love that story.
That's an amazing story, yeah.
Let me ask you this. I've read many times where you, over the last couple of years, you've extended your hand to help out a lot of the wrestlers that are maybe struggling with addiction or abuse. And, one of your peers that's turned into a real tragic figure over the last couple of years is the Iron Sheik. And I'm curious as to what your take is on the Iron Sheik, and if you're, aware of his current state.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think all of us are aware. I've been a subscriber to Dave Meltzer's newsletter since the 90s,
Yeah.
And, I'm aware. It's a tragic deal, and have no idea why or how. I think it was just his nature to begin with, that he was going to go down that self-destructive road, you know. And it's a horrible thing, and we have no answers for it, but it's one of the modern day tragedies,
Yeah. Have you ever had a chance to extend your hand or talk to the Sheik over the last couple of years?
No, I saw him and visited with him in Los Angeles, I think 2 years ago now, maybe 3 at the Hall of Fame and WrestleMania.
Oh, okay.
Out in Los Angeles. We had a great visit out there, and I didn't feel that I was in a place to advise or counsel him.
Yeah.
When I myself was still having all kinds of diffiences,
Yeah.
Even though I overcame everything.
Right.
Yeah.
You were out there, very outspoken after the horrific Chris Benoit tragedy, and I ask you this: with the way the current WWE schedule is, and the pressures and the rigors, can a full-time successful wrestler in the WWE function at the current state without any kind of dependency?
I don't know about the personal level ability for the current guys to perform under the extensive traveling schedule. I know that when I was champion, the year I had that belt, just about a full year, I was the first wrestler to take it out of the Northeast, as you probably recall, going down to Florida with Dusty and St. Louis, stuff like that. I wrestled around 330 times that year. Wow. And it was absurd, but I wanted to take advantage of it. And so I had my dependency. There was no way that me personally could have traveled, could have trained, could have dieted, could have done the exhausting scheduling without chemical help.
Right.
And it's just almost because, Eric, you're going through different time zones.
Yeah.
Your jet lag and your system is so thrown off by jet lag and the irregularity of your scheduling is just wreaks havoc on your physical body,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I went out a couple of weeks ago, and I do some announcing on the side, and I went out to do that San Francisco show, that big convention that they had.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. I did the announcing for it, and, here in Philly, I pretty much flew out. I don't like to spend a lot of time in place, so I like to just fly out and come home. And I did that, and I remember saying to my friends, man, I can't imagine how those guys in the 80s could survive, going from time zone to time zone, sometimes more than one in a day. Yes,
of course. It was strictly, I'll speak for myself on this, a chemical dependence. Also, because a person like me, I had to throw in the factor of training in a gym every day.
Yeah.
See, I was a bodybuilder, and to keep my look, I had to get there, fly to a town, rent a car, get a hotel room, eat, go to the gym, get back, get a 2-hour workout in, go to the arena, do your deal, get back, eat, go to bed, get up early the next morning, and do the same thing.
Wow.
See, so it's a horrific, destructive thing on your system.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to ask you about this before we take a break. During during all the media appearances following that horrific tragedy, Ken Kennedy was a guy that stood up and, pretty much called you out for being a hypocrite, called everybody else speaking out against the WWE hypocrites. I had Bruno on that weekend that his comments came out, and Bruno just went nuts about the situation and Kennedy. But Kennedy was a guy that actually, more or less called you out specifically. Then a couple of weeks later, he wound up being suspended on the wellness policy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, that blindsided me, Eric. Because I've always taken the heat for my own steroid use and abuse. Never blamed anyone except myself. Except a period of time when when I did file a fictitious lawsuit against Vince McMahon over a steroids issue, and I was very saddened by Kennedy's remarks because I had actually told him in person when I was having my book tour, one of the towns, and he was coming off an injury, that he was so talented that he should never even consider using steroids to enhance his physique.
Wow. Because
of his natural talking ability. And I told that he could be another Roddy Piper type character. See?
Yeah.
And he accepted and my wife was sitting there with me when we had this hour-long discussion. And it seemed that he really, he did have a lot of respect for me. And it was just, I felt sad. I counseled with Jim Ross over that Kennedy reaction. And Jim Ross told me that he felt that Kennedy, being a great guy that he is, and I quote, which is a great term, just needed more time under the learning tree. A young guy and not really matured, and he just, and I sent an email directly to Kennedy through John Laurinaitis, the secretary.
Okay.
And my first interview that I did, it was on CBS, Katie Couric, National News. on CBS. And before I went on the air, Linda McMahon called me here in Phoenix from Stamford to thank me about going on the air and distancing the Benoit tragedy from steroids.
Wow.
I did that. That was my first interview, and I got a personal phone call from Linda McMahon, and I reminded Ken Kennedy of that.
Yeah.
That Linda herself called me, and every interview I did, I distanced Benoit's tragedy from the use of steroids.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm very disappointed in Kennedy, because he was such a nice guy to me, and he probably still is a nice guy.
Yeah.
But then to make that stand and then to be exposed.
Right.
You see, that really, and honestly, Eric, I'm going on record right now on your show as saying, and you could put this out there, I am disappointed that Ken Kennedy has not sent me an apology email.
Wow. I thought that's how you were gonna end the story, that he wrote you back and apologized, etc.
Yes, I was waiting. I've been waiting for that apology, and you know what? It has never come, and I'm going on record that I'm extremely disappointed in Ken Kennedy and his character. His character should have automatically said, wait a minute, let me reevaluate this situation, and let me go back and do some research on all of the interviews that Billy Graham did. I was on, I was out there.
Sure.
You know that. I was on a lot of television stations.
Sure.
And I'm very disappointed. And you know what? Honestly, right now, I'm going to tell you right now, his failure to reach out to me and make amends was the final blow as far as me recognizing wrestlers as really good, honest human beings that most of them are. But it just crushed me. The guy didn't have the decency to send me an apology.
Yeah.
And has let me down in the quality of the character of professional wrestlers.
Wow. Amen to that. Billy, I'm going to take a quick time out. If you'd be so good to hang on, possibly when we come back from the break, we'll squeeze in some calls for you.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Fantastic. What a day it is. We are talking to the legend himself, Superstar Billy Graham, here on Pro Wrestling Radio. If you have a question for Superstar Billy Graham, give us a call at 1-888-922-2149. The phones are already ringing. 1-888-922-2149. You're listening to the show in a couple of places. One, on the internet, live at WBCB1490.com. Archived on my website at ProWrestlingRadio.com. And on the air, WBCB 1490 AM.
And now back to more Wrestle Talk with the man himself, Eric Gargiulo.
Thank you very much, Bill Melody. And we are talking to the legend himself, Superstar Billy Graham, and we will take your calls momentarily. We have a couple on hold for the great Superstar. But, Billy, I want to ask you this question. I'm real curious for your take on this. I write a lot about wrestling, and I've written a lot over the last couple of months about TNA wrestling, and I don't know how familiar you are with things over there, but I've written a lot about them turning into a safe haven for guys that are failing drug tests in the WWE, and rather than complying, deciding to opt out and just go to TNA on their own. And I've been able to cite many examples of that. I received a letter after the last article I wrote. The last article I wrote about was after Booker T wound up showing up over there. I received a letter from somebody in TNA management blasting me for writing about this and having denials for everything and all the individuals that I wrote about. And these are all documented cases. What is your take on what's going on with them all of a sudden, in my opinion anyway, turning into a safe haven for these guys that are failing the wellness policy in the WWE?
Yes, that's a very good question, and I appreciate that. Personally, I cannot speak to the failures of drug policies or the non-failures of TNA. I can tell you that that their stance, evidently, that what I've read, and I go back to all I know is what I read in my friend Dave Meltzer's newsletter. We're very, very close personal friends, Dave and I take his newsletter as gospel.
As do I. Yes.
And it is absolutely, let me tell you something, Eric, it is absolutely the nature of the beast of pro wrestling to be dishonest, to lie, to cheat, to steal, and to deceive. Because after all, you know, back in the day, when we were kayfabing everybody, well, we were. That was our sole goal. Of course, was deception to make the thing a reality. See, so we lived that deception. You know, it was like, you know the stories of the old school, man.
Sure.
Yeah, you know, and so, but that there is. Listen to me right now. Listen to me. There is nothing holy. There is nothing sacred about pro wrestling. So don't ever be shocked by anything you hear, by any denial of any professional wrestling organization. It is the nature of the sinful, deceptive beast of pro wrestling to deceive and continue to deceive.
Yeah, okay? Great.
And now, let me throw this in about Bruno Sammartino.
Okay.
In August, I was at the big convention, Fan Fest in New York.
Okay.
Out on Long Island. And I was talking to Terry Funk, my dear friend Terry Funk, and we were talking about Bruno Sammartino. And Terry Funk, as you know, as you may have read or heard at that convention, turned out to be a complete mark for Bruno Sammartino and his character.
Wow.
And he's talked about it, and is absolutely, and let me tell you something, where Bruno Sammartino, this man has never caused one public nuisance incident as a professional wrestler. This man was a role model for fans and family to see a professional wrestler, how he can really be. You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And this guy never threw any furniture out of a hotel room, never caused a disturbance, never got drunk in public, never did drugs. And so I'm just telling you that it can be done, and Bruno Sammartino is the gold standard as far as character in professional wrestling and all sports, of course.
That's great. And, Terry, ironically enough, I had Terry Funk on one weekend prior to when I was having Bruno on the next Saturday, and that's exactly what he said. He just went on about Bruno's character, and he pointed to an incident when Bruno was very loyal to Baba in Japan, even when Vince Sr. was doing business with New Japan, causing all kinds of problems behind the scenes. And Bruno was very humbled when he heard Terry's comments about that.
Oh, yes. Well, I committed a major error sometime back when I publicly said that Bruno Sammartino was bitter and was treating his son David unfairly because of David's alleged steroid use many years ago.
Right.
And I had misspoken at his convention in New York's Long Island. I personally went up to Bruno Sammartino and apologized to him, one man to another man, that I made a huge mistake by speaking publicly about people's private lives. And so I want to go on record again as saying that I've apologized to Bruno. He has, in fact, accepted my apology.
Oh, that's great.
And so we moved on, because after all, as I told Bruno, it was him passing the torch to me that solidified my career and establish me as a future Hall of Famer, even though I was well on my way. But it was that title, the gaining of that title, WWWF champion, that solidified my career to make it possible that you and I are talking today.
Yeah, well, that's just fantastic. That's just great. And we are talking to superstar Billy Graham. Let's put up a call for Billy Graham, and when we bring you up on the air, if you can just state your name and ask your question or questions, we'll bring you down, and then we'll allow the great superstar to respond. First question comes from Vince in Fairless Hills. Vince, how are you?
I'm good.
Excellent.
Hey, I got two quick questions for the superstar, but first it's nice just talking to you side by side. When I first started getting into wrestling, you were the first one with really the muscles and the clothes and the attitude. And I hate to say, I know Jesse followed behind you. Was he a protege of yours? And did you also have the opportunity to work for Vince, the father, as well as the son? And who would be nicer?
Oh, thank you very much for your questions. Well, Billy, I guess we can take the second one first. Everybody, maybe they're not aware. You worked for Vince Sr. for many, many years, and I guess maybe a comparison of the two.
Oh, Vince Sr. Okay, Vince Sr., extremely wonderful, kind, a gentleman who had the class, who just had almost a halo around him of dignity and character and class. Not to say that Vince Jr. does not,
right?
But this was his persona when Vince Sr. walked in the room, standing straight as an arrow, and very dignified looking and very courteous and polite and self-assured. This man was the epitome and the gold standard of a wrestling promoter or a businessman, period. However, what he lacked, what Mr. McMahon Sr. lacked and Vince Jr. had in abundance was, and still does have in abundance, is the ability to promote merchandise. And sadly, Vince Sr. was not even interested in creating T-shirts as an avenue to bring in more revenue, or even photographs. Nothing, absolutely zero interest in marketing. Well, lo and behold, his son had some good genes.
Yeah.
As far as the marketing went. And so what the father did not have, the son has in abundance. And as a matter of fact, at Eddie Guerrero's funeral service here in Phoenix 2 years ago now that I conducted, I made that statement during the service for Eddie Guerrero with Vince sitting there in the congregation, that indeed Vince McMahon is a marketing genius and will in fact be able to market Eddie Guerrero's name and his everything associated with Eddie Guerrero after death, as well as while he was living, in order to provide financial relief for Vicky Guerrero and his children.
Yeah.
And so that is your difference. Junior is a mastermind, a genius at marketing, and will not miss a thing. Where Senior was purely involved and committed, dedicated to just the self-promotion of the business.
Yeah, and Vince's second question was he wanted to know if you had any hand in mentoring Jesse Ventura when he more or less morphed into the superstar gimmick.
Oh yes, of course. I never took Jesse aside and sat him down. Jesse in Minneapolis tracked me down where I was training at the gym, the Jack Sharkey's gym on Hennepin Avenue, downtown Minneapolis, and introduced himself to me, and we started talking, and I could tell immediately that Jesse had this enormous amount of charisma. And he asked me what to do about his wrestling career, and I told Jesse Ventura, the first thing you do, sir, is you get out of Minneapolis, because they're not going to let you in with me here and you wanting to look and talk and act like me.
Right.
You see?
Yeah.
And Vern Gagne and Wally Carbo, they actually told me personally to just, because Jesse Ventura would come up to the office and try to get in, and they saw Jesse Ventura as a nuisance.
Wow.
And they said, Superstar, please just don't even talk to Jesse Ventura. And I said, well, wait a minute, this is a nice guy. He just wants to be a wrestler.
Yeah.
You know? Like, that's all he wants, is to be a wrestler.
Yeah.
So I told Jesse, the best thing for you, young man, is to leave this city, start your career, and then come back. And he took that advice, and that's what he did.
Excellent, excellent. Now, we're facing the very real possibility that Congress may dissect the wrestling business and may choose to regulate it somehow. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that wrestling needs to have that big brother looking in, or do you think that it's too much of an intrusion?
Well, this is the thing. I know we're running out of time here, and by the way, sometime in the future, I would like to come back to answer more questions from the fans.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
To do that, because I really enjoy talking to the fans. That's one thing that we were forbidden to do in the old school era.
Yeah.
Was to, as you know, as the historian you are now yourself, that we were just forbidden, and now it's like it's fun. It's I enjoy it. So I'd like to in the future, after the first year, maybe come back.
Absolutely. Maybe we'll talk, and maybe sometime towards the end of January we could put something together.
Yes, that would be great.
That'd be my pleasure and honor. Excellent. So, but about Congress, if you can give me maybe like a 60 to 90 quick second answer on your thoughts about Congress taking a look at wrestling.
Yes, I think that Congress and the government, especially in light of Barry Bonds being ushered into court yesterday, as we all saw, pleading not guilty to perjury, 2 counts of perjury and 1 count of obstruction of justice, as a legitimate professional baseball player, speaks volumes as to the culture that we live in. And we expect professional wrestlers to be deceptive, and the public does too, because they know we're just entertainers and we're not a legitimate sport.
Yeah.
However, when it goes to the level of a Barry Bonds deceiving the general public and enhancing his performance, and the government now going to court with him, I think it's the good for all of humanity, period, to try to eliminate drugs in professional sports.
Wow, well said, well said. Billy, real quick, do you have anything you want to promote or anything?
No, just the fans that don't have never gotten my DVD, I know they would enjoy that. I think you'll enjoy that more than the book because of all the clips and everything in there. And it's just been a pleasure to be on this show, Eric. And let's stay in touch.
Definitely.
And we'll get back on here after the first year sometime.
Excellent, excellent. Happy holidays to you, and really, truly, a real honor today. And thanks for coming on, and I can't wait to have you back.
You're welcome, and thank you very much. And God bless everybody, and everybody have a great Christmas coming up. Okay, buddy?
All right, thank you, Superstar.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye-bye.
Take care. There you go, Superstar Billy Graham, exclusively here on Pro Wrestling Radio. If you missed any of the interview, I will have it on my website at sometime during the weekend. You can download it at ProWrestlingRadio.com. That's ProWrestlingRadio.com. Well, it's about that time for me to wrap it up. I want to thank Bill Melody for making things happen on this end of the board. And Bill will be following me until 6 o'clock with the Country Music Hall, exclusive country music all day on WBCB. And then Bill will be back tomorrow morning from 5 to 10 a.m. ProWrestlingRadio.com is my website. My column runs on PhillyBurbs.com in the blog section, The Camel Clutch. I will humble you. We'll see you next Saturday at 12:05 on WBCB. We'll be joined by former WWWF World Heavyweight Champion, Hall of Fame inductee, and just one of the all-time greats, Superstar Billy Graham, in about 10 minutes. I just talked to him. He's running a little bit behind. So I will be joined by Billy Graham at about 12:15. I will take your calls with Billy Graham once he comes on the show. We'll ask him a couple of questions, and then I'll start taking calls at about 25 after. And you will have your chance to talk to one of the all-time greats, Superstar Billy Graham. And what he did tell me was that he wants to be asked the tough questions. If you have a question about Vince McMahon, about drug abuse, about steroid abuse, Billy Graham, one of those controversial figures in this sport, he's a self-admitted ex-drug addict. He used steroids, one of the pioneers of bringing steroids into the professional wrestling business, and he has no problem saying so. And he also has no problems telling you the effects to his body today and how it has affected him and his family and his career, which is very negatively. But Billy Graham does not mind being asked to tell my childhood, and I think that we all love and respect what Ric Flair has given us as fans, especially the fans that grew up watching Ric Flair in his prime and even the years thereafter. But the Ric Flair that I watched on Monday Night Raw 2 weeks ago, wrestling Randy Orton, win or not, wow, just what a far cry from the Ric Flair we grew up with. And, you know, yeah, you give him some leeway because he is Ric Flair. He's coming up on his 59th birthday, and we understand that. But, I mean, my goodness, Ric Flair looked every bit of his age and then some. You know, there are guys that have wrestled in their 70s, and while they may look to be elderly, they don't exactly look their age. But, man, Ric Flair looked like what my grandfather, God bless his soul, if he was still alive, would look like if he was in there wrestling at 59. I mean, he just did not look good. It did not look good for the entire WWE. For fans that aren't aware of the legacy of Ric Flair, and they're just tuning in and watching this guy, they're thinking, why is this grandfather being able to hang in there with Randy Orton on the show? Because it was just such a different era, and I just have so much respect for those gentlemen and women from that era. And Billy Graham, he's got such a great story. I mean, I've read his book. I've watched his DVD. I've watched countless interviews. I've read countless interviews with him. And he's a guy that doesn't pull any punches. So, you know, it'll be interesting to hear what the superstar has to say. And, of course, due to the shortened time, I expected him for the hour. We're getting him for about 45, 40 minutes. Billy Graham will reschedule and have him back for another hour sometime in the new year. So, I'm going to come up at 12:15, superstar Billy Graham. A couple of quick things that I'll hit on before we go to superstar Billy Graham. Ric Flair, his legacy is in jeopardy, and I wrote a lengthy piece on PhillyBurbs.com this week taking a look at Ric Flair and his legacy. You know, I was one of many who beat the drum. Be fair to Flair. Give him one last chance. He deserves that last opportunity. I was one of many who said that here, who wrote about it. I'm a big Ric Flair fan. I mean, one of my all-time favorites. Watching Ric Flair really takes me back to my teenage years. What's
your Gargiulo? That's hella. WBCB presents. That's cool. Are you talking to me? Pro Wrestling Radio. Come get some. Did you feel it? Oh, the damn soul. Call in with a question or comment. 6-1. Just bring it. What is he doing? At 1-888-922-2149. Oh, it's true. Don't make me hurt you. Be awesome. To be the man. You got it. That's hard time. I hate your ever. And now your host of the show. That's how I roll. Eric. Excuse me. And that's the bottom line.
Good afternoon and welcome to a very special edition of Pro Wrestling Radio. My name is Eric Gargiulo, and I will be here until 1 o'clock talking about the sport of professional wrestling. Now, I will questions. Billy was very outspoken following the tragic deaths of Nancy Benoit, Chris Benoit's son, and, of course, Chris Benoit himself. So Billy Graham was very outspoken about drug abuse in professional wrestling, and Billy will be here today talking about that, talking about his career, and really anything else that you want to ask him. So that will be coming up in less than 10 minutes. Superstar Billy Graham, one of my all-time favorites. I mean, I sometimes just sit and search through YouTube on my downtime and just look for old Superstar Billy Graham promos because, just what an innovator of the interview Superstar Billy Graham was. I mean, just really what a pioneer of the wrestling business today. What we see today, all the showmanship, the entertainment, the glamour, a lot of people will point back to Gorgeous George as the man that pioneered that. And, yes, he definitely changed the way professional wrestling was presented. But Superstar Billy Graham just took it to a whole other level. And I'm really excited to be talking to Superstar Billy Graham. I love having the all-time great